Mary Jemison entered the world aboard a crowded immigrant vessel in 1743, one of many ships bringing European settlers to American shores. Her Irish parents, having sold their modest possessions to afford passage, traveled with their children in hopes of finding religious freedom and economic opportunity in the colonies. After landing, the family established themselves briefly in Philadelphia, where they worked to earn enough money to pursue their dream of owning land. Within a few years, they joined the wave of settlers moving to the Pennsylvania frontier, claiming a homestead where they could build a new life. The family's daily routine centered on the demanding work of frontier survival. They cleared dense forest, removed stumps, and prepared fields for planting, working from dawn until dusk. Their small log cabin offered basic shelter, while they gradually added outbuildings for livestock and storage. The soil proved fertile, but every acre had to be won through back-breaking labor. Living on the frontier in the 1750s meant facing constant threats. Wild animals threatened their livestock and crops. Wolves would prey on sheep, bears would raid cornfields, and panthers posed dangers to both animals and humans. More worrying were the tensions with Indian tribes, whose territories were increasingly encroached upon by colonial settlements. The family maintained constant watchfulness, keeping weapons ready and establishing plans for seeking shelter if danger approached. These precautions proved prescient, as their fears materialized into reality on a spring morning in 1758, during the escalating conflict between British colonies and French forces. The political situation had grown increasingly complex as the Iroquois Confederacy, a powerful alliance of 6 nations, the Cayuga, Oneida, Seneca, Mohawk, Onondaga, and Tuscarora, aligned themselves with the French against British expansion. These tribes were known for their military prowess and sophisticated political organization, making them formidable allies in the conflict. That fateful spring morning, a well-coordinated raiding party consisting of French soldiers and Indian warriors executed a precise attack on the frontier settlement. Moving swiftly and strategically, they overwhelmed the scattered homesteads before an effective defense could be mounted. The raiders captured several British colonists, including Mary and most of her family members. In the confusion of the attack, 2 of her brothers managed to escape into the surrounding forest, using their knowledge of the terrain to evade capture. For 13-year-old Mary, this violent encounter marked the beginning of an extraordinary transformation. What started as a traumatic capture would evolve into a complete cultural adaptation. She would spend the next 78 years immersed in Indian society, learning their languages, customs, and ways of life. Until her death, she remained within this adopted culture, becoming a unique witness to a pivotal period in American history. The historical significance of Mary Jemison's experiences was formally documented when her narrative was published in 1824, providing a first-hand account of colonial frontier life and cross-cultural relations during the French and Indian War. The events of March 1758 began in the early morning hours as Mary, her mother, and a female friend performed their routine task of preparing breakfast in their frontier cabin. The sudden crack of musket fire shattered the morning quiet, compelling them to investigate. Upon reaching the doorway, they discovered a grim scene. One of their neighbors, who had attempted to escape on horseback, lay dead alongside his mount a short distance from their cabin. The raiders had executed their attack with tactical precision, eliminating the possibility of warning other settlers. The raiding party, revealing their presence after the shooting, stormed the cabin with overwhelming force. The assault group consisted of 6 Indian warriors and 4 French soldiers, demonstrating the effective military alliance between these forces. Their actions followed a calculated strategy. After securing their prisoners, they immediately began a systematic plundering of essential supplies. They focused primarily on portable, high-value provisions, bread, meal, and preserved meat, items crucial for sustaining both raiders and captives during a long journey. The raiders proceeded with military efficiency toward Fort Duquesne, a strategic French stronghold located at what would later become Pittsburgh. The location of their destination was carefully chosen, as Fort Duquesne served as a critical military installation controlling access to the Ohio River Valley. The captors moved with urgency through the wilderness, their haste driven by the legitimate fear of colonial militia pursuit. They had executed a precise operation, securing prisoners, gathering essential supplies, and initiating a rapid withdrawal into the dense forest where they held the tactical advantage. The forced march demonstrated the raiders' strict military discipline and survival tactics. One Indian warrior maintained position at the rear of the group, wielding a whip to enforce the pace, paying particular attention to the children who struggled to maintain the demanding speed. The captors' refusal to stop for water or food served dual purposes, maintaining rapid movement to avoid pursuit while simultaneously weakening the prisoners' ability to resist or escape. The physical toll on the captives intensified as the day progressed. Having gone without sustenance since the previous evening, the prisoners endured increasing exhaustion and dehydration. The raiders' treatment of the children revealed their harsh pragmatism. When the youngest captives cried out for water, they were presented with an appalling choice: drink urine or endure their thirst. This practice, while brutal, eliminated the need for water stops that could delay their progress or risk detection. The nighttime encampment exhibited calculated security measures. The raiders chose a position in the woods but prohibited fire-making, eliminating any signal that might attract rescue parties. They established a vigilant guard rotation, maintaining constant surveillance over their prisoners. The captives, already exhausted from the day's march, were forced to sleep directly on the ground without blankets or shelter. The children's treatment remained severe, with the same harsh drinking options enforced throughout the night. Physical exhaustion eventually provided brief respite through sleep, though discomfort and hunger persisted. At first light, the march resumed with the same military precision and order as the previous day. The raiders maintained their formation until sunrise, when they finally called a halt. In a calculated shift in tactics, they distributed provisions taken from the Jemison household, offering a full breakfast to their prisoners. The captives, overcome by hunger, accepted this sustenance, all except Mary's father. His physical exhaustion, compounded by severe psychological distress, rendered him unable to eat, marking the depth of his mental anguish in the face of their desperate situation. The profound psychological impact of captivity manifested clearly in Mary's father's demeanor. His face bore the unmistakable mark of deep despair, a mental anguish so severe that he refused all attempts to convince him to eat, even as his physical strength diminished visibly. The depth of his withdrawal became even more apparent as the group continued their forced march. His sole utterance during the entire ordeal came when they passed Fort Kanagojiga before midday, a brief moment of speech that stood in stark contrast to his otherwise complete silence throughout their captivity until their final separation the following night. The raiders maintained their strategic movement through the terrain, ultimately guiding their prisoners to a carefully selected location as evening approached. Their chosen campsite lay at the edge of a forbidding swamp, its tactical advantages evident in the dense cover provided by hemlock trees and thick evergreen vegetation. The raiders led their captives a calculated distance into this natural fortress, using the challenging terrain as an additional barrier against both escape attempts and potential rescue parties. Despite the physical demands of their journey, the evening meal of bread and meat provided little comfort to the prisoners. The overwhelming psychological burden of their situation, the uncertainty of their fate, the oppressive environment of the swamp, and the looming prospect of permanent separation superseded even their physical hunger. This mental distress manifested physically, diminishing their appetite and making even the simple act of eating a challenge. The presence of food, rather than providing relief, served as a stark reminder of their desperate circumstances and uncertain future. I had just completed my evening meal when a significant moment occurred that my mother immediately recognized. One of our captors approached me with deliberate purpose, removed my colonial footwear, my shoes and stockings, and replaced them with Indian moccasins. My mother observed this ceremonial act with growing comprehension. Based on her knowledge of Indian raids and captive taking, she understood this gesture as a sign that I would be spared while others might face a darker fate. This realization prompted my mother to deliver what she knew might be her final words to me. I can still recall her desperate farewell, delivered in a voice that struggled to remain steady. "My dear little Mary," she began, her words carrying the weight of maternal love and terrible foreknowledge, "I fear that the time has arrived when we must be parted forever. Your life, my child, I think will be spared, but we shall probably be tomahawked here in this lonesome place by the Indians." Her composure began to fragment as the full impact of our situation overwhelmed her. "Oh, how can I part with you, my darling? What will become of my sweet little Mary?" The questions poured forth, each one revealing deeper layers of her anguish. "Oh, how can I think of your being continued in captivity without a hope of your being rescued?" In her growing despair, she even voiced a terrible wish that I had died in infancy, reasoning that such a loss would have been easier to bear than this forced separation and uncertain future. "Oh, that death had snatched you from my embraces in your infancy," she lamented. "The pain of parting then would have been pleasing to what it now is, and I should have seen the end of your troubles." Through her tears, she continued, her voice thick with emotion, but determined to impart crucial advice. "Alas, my dear, my heart bleeds at the thought of what awaits you." Then, summoning her strength, she focused on practical matters that might help me preserve my identity. "But if you leave us, remember, my child, your own name and the names of your father and mother. Be careful and not forget your English tongue." My mother's final instructions revealed her deep understanding of survival in our frontier environment. With urgency in her voice, she warned me against attempting escape, knowing that such an attempt would likely end in tragedy. Her practical wisdom, born from years of frontier life, recognized that the Indians' superior tracking skills and knowledge of the wilderness would make escape futile and dangerous. "If you shall have an opportunity to get away from the Indians, don't try to escape," she cautioned, "for if you do, they will find and destroy you." Her attention then turned to spiritual matters, seeking to ensure that I would maintain my religious foundation in captivity. "Don't forget, my little daughter, the prayers that I have learned you. Say them often," she urged, her voice carrying both instruction and comfort. Her final benediction came as a mother's blessing. "Be a good child, and God will bless you. May God bless you, my child, and make you comfortable and happy." During these moments of farewell, I observed the Indians performing the same ritual with another young captive, the little boy who belonged to our captured neighbor. They removed his colonial footwear and replaced it with moccasins, just as they had done with mine, marking us both for adoption into their society. I could not contain my grief and began to weep openly. An Indian warrior stepped forward, taking both the little boy and me by our hands. As he began leading us away from the group, my mother's final words rang out with desperate clarity. "Don't cry, Mary. Don't cry, my child. God will bless you. Farewell, farewell." The sound of her voice speaking these last words would stay with me forever. The warrior led us deeper into the forest, eventually selecting a spot where we would rest for the night. Sleep eluded me entirely, as memories of parting from my mother played repeatedly in my mind, bringing fresh tears with each recollection. Throughout the long night, my young companion repeatedly pleaded with me to attempt escape together. His desperate whispers revealed his terror, but I remembered my mother's warning about the futility of flight. I drew upon my mother's final wisdom as the little boy repeatedly begged me to attempt escape. Understanding the perilous nature of our situation, lacking knowledge of the terrain, without provisions, and facing the skilled tracking abilities of our captors, I firmly refused his desperate pleas. My insistence that he remain still until morning likely saved both our lives, as my worst fears about those we left behind were soon confirmed. The brutal aftermath of our capture became clear. My parents, along with Robert, Matthew, Betsy, and the woman and her 2 children, had all been killed immediately after our separation. The raiders had not only taken their lives, but had mutilated their bodies in a manner too horrific to fully describe. Following this savage act, we continued our forced march through rain-soaked terrain until reaching a sheltered thicket. There, the Indians constructed a simple shelter of branches and built a fire, allowing us to warm our cold limbs and dry our wet clothing. After providing us with another meal, our captors engaged in a methodical ritual that revealed the full horror of their actions. They retrieved multiple scalps from their supplies and began a precise preservation process. Their technique demonstrated a disturbing expertise, stretching the bloody trophies over small, specially prepared hoops, holding them near the fire for partial drying, then meticulously scraping away flesh with sharp knives. This process of alternating between drying and scraping continued until each scalp was completely cleaned. The final steps of their preparation proved most agonizing for me to witness. They carefully combed each scalp's hair and applied red paint to both the hair and the edges. The distinctive characteristics of these terrible trophies left no doubt as to their origins. My mother's vibrant red hair made hers immediately identifiable, while I could also recognize the unique characteristics of my father's and siblings' hair. Though this sight filled me with unspeakable horror, I maintained my composure, knowing any display of emotion might prove dangerous. Later that night, through gestures and broken English, the raiders conveyed their justification. The killing of my family had been an act of retaliation, prompted by pursuit from white settlers. Their message carried a clear implication about the cycle of violence that characterized frontier life. As we preserve and share these profound historical accounts, we gain crucial insights into the complex relationships between settlers and Native Americans during America's formative years. If you value the preservation and discussion of such significant historical narratives, consider supporting our channel. Your engagement helps ensure these important stories continue to educate and illuminate our understanding of the past. Join our community of history enthusiasts as we explore more compelling accounts that shaped our nation's early years.